Typically, I take it for claim that there are sufficient agreement is insufficient, and I would mostly talk as if there are two realism and anti-realism, although that's what called graphical interpretation, just thinking about talking. Second, there are no arguments on any side that are conclusive, decisive, no notion. Third, there's minimal progress of movement. There's kind of standstill. That is, I think, part of the claim of the stalemate. No new arguments. And fourth, can we survive? Fourth is subjective. Okay, I'm not just my pocket. All I would say on that. And given that, my pocket for parts. The first, I want to get the first little reason why I doubt that there is a stalemate in the sense of standstill. The second part, I will look at non-participants and will argue that they are mostly realists. And I gave that part, that was the whole talk, the second part, I gave that last week in our department colloquium, and nobody agreed with my things, so I had to change that a bit. Okay, I shortened it, and I had to come up with a third reason. So that means that's it. If disjoint, three reasons, and in the conclusion, I will pretend that I gave a nice point. Okay. So now, first reason, it's kind of fairly obvious also from this conference. There seems to be a lot of movement and seems to be still happening in the recent past. So claims about the stalemate are already occurred in the 1980s and 1970s, and at least since then we have some rather clear developments, arguments. Yeah, I changed that. I don't know where that comes from. Okay, the definition arguments have lost in importance compared to the 1980s and 90s. Novel predictions like of the battery and seeing that as important in the realism debate. Various forms of intermediate positions, new induction stances, localism, and so on. And again, these things also in quite a lot of things. So, yeah, I think there's a lot happening. Okay, so that was already my first reason. Now to the second reason. Okay, I saw that a bit in real time. So I looked at non-participants of the debate. Okay, people who don't participate in the realism debate, and what their attitude might be. And one can distinguish between different groups, scientists. That's of course a big question. I'm going to try to explain a little about that. In society generally, many persons who are interested in science or apply science. There, I just say one sentence without much support, but it seems to me that they are really realists. If one looks at what they consume, Wikipedia or the science section in the newspaper or the science books, they're very much realist. And for this part, I, as anti-realist, I only focus on the draft. Not to believe on answer or just to be specific so that I have it real easier. So that's what I mean now with anti-realism. Okay, so that's all I want to say about laypersons. Then philosophers generally, whether philosopher of science or not. There we have this poem, I guess most of you know that, from Burchett and Chalmers. They asked 100 questions to, I think, 1800 philosophers, and that's quite clear majority is scientific realist, 70%. So that's, I think that's already pretty good support for the claim that the majority are outside, non-participants are realists. So what one generally sees with non-participants is what one sees, okay? That's not that difficult. What one sees if they use realist language and they treat well-supported statements about established knowledge, it's fact. But the question is what attitude lies behind that? What do they believe? That's the hard question. And I think for, again, laypersons, it's often fairly plausible that what lies behind is also a realist attitude. But then I also looked at philosophers of science. Namely, when they are not engaged in the real debate, how they, in particular, treat unobservables. So I looked at philosophy of science, all articles of the last year, 82 articles, and 25 mention at least once one of those unobservables. Okay. So I searched that with actually the ordinary search engine of Acrobat Reader. So no AI here yet, but that's a powerful search engine. You can look at all the 82 articles. And I think that's interesting, philosophers of science, because one can assume that they are mostly aware of the realism debate, at least to some degree. So they know of the debate and argue these positions. So the findings, what one sees, okay, in the texts. Nearly all authors refer to unobservables and their properties in a realistic manner. We talk realistically, treat them as facts, don't express any doubts. Okay. And second, they don't even mention anything having to do with the realism debate. They don't. I mean, in various arguments, for example, past theory changes or whatever. Okay, so they completely ignore the realism debate. One might think that, at least in a footnote, they would mention at least some of these 25 authors mention maybe some reservations or so, or some hints, but no, that's at least in that database, I have a second one in that database, that's really all authors. Here's one example. Person here. The article is on cognitive characters, so characters are adaptations, traits that are adaptations, and that person is interested in cognitive characters. And now in boldface are the statements about unobservables. So person says some characters such as DNA are found in just about all existing organisms. That's the first statement. Others such as omnibox genes are very widely distributed. That's the second one. Okay. Omnibox genes are genes that's a stretch of 180 base pairs that codes for this homeodomain, which sits on the DNA, that's the helix, and it controls what is expressed. So it's important for the development of embryo, and the biggest discovery was that it is extremely widespread. Many organisms have the very same homeobox gene. That's just So the findings again, person talks entirely realistically about unobservables, treats them as facts, okay, only oxygen are widespread, and no mention of entirely. Okay, those are the findings. So I thought, obviously, that the best interpretation of that, the inference now to the attitude, the beliefs behind what they write, is that they are realists, that they really believe, they talk in realism, and because they are realists, people miss facts, because they think they are facts and so on. And that's where I got blow back, because the other interpretation that I offered, dealing with Fahrbach, so the Fahrbach, I guess, the scientists, they were on the top, realistically. And our interpretation is that they talk and speak realistically, but behind that is an empirist attitude. So here's another example. So three authors. It's an article on experiments on quantum phenomena. Just the first sentence here in the last. Modern experimental practice allows for a staggering degree of control over lab-based quantum systems. Individual ions can be electronically trapped. So here's the trap. There is the ion. If you have good eyes, you can see the ion. And again, not entirely realistically, but now comes the anti-realist interpretation. And a very nice presentation of that is by Ian Rosen, talking about 2000. It's a rather old article, but really nice how he says it. So the authors, I only read the boldface stuff. Which means these the authors. I immerse myself in the theory about quantum phenomena and ions. I live in its world, in the laboratory, in the classroom, and perhaps even in everyday life. I will speak as if I believe my theory, in fact, as if it were true. Okay. Only in philosophical moments, when called upon to say what I really believe, will I step back and withhold passions from the theory. Okay, so there are two attitudes in the mind. One is when one is immersed, that's realist attitude, and the other in the mind is when it steps back, and says what one really believes. And I thought that's far less plausible and straightforward, but the audience disagreed, so I have to take that. Now I say it's hard to determine from the text how they speak to what is behind that. I still wonder a bit whether this is not a bit more forced than the realist interpretation. Because one has two things in one mind, and one would also think that if one really believes something else, then what one really believes should have some relevance, and it's also important, one should think. So should be at least with some of the 25 authors, maybe a footnote of some such. Okay, so you can touch on yourself. Then I come to my third part. This is now some suggestions for future directions. So that's again about the standstill. I mean, going back to so the first reason and the third reason are about progress, whether there's movement or not. And I argued already that in the past there certainly was quite some movement until recently. There is past, including this conference. And now I will argue that also in the future, there are promising ways, avenues to still and that's a bit from I now think I here are at least influenced by that. So very narrowly now on meta-induction, okay, which relies on episodes, analysis of historical episodes, and now very focused on that. I will not say how, I think there are still interesting things to investigate. Okay, yeah, 3 examples that you all also know from geocentric worldview to heliocentrics, phlogiston to oxygen chemistry, Carolingic fluid theory, and because now there are consensus there, I think, and 2 temperature motion, and so on. So now my first kind of suggestion is that these analysis of historical episodes focus too narrowly just on those episodes. What comes afterwards is also important and relevant. That's what I want to argue and also under investigate. So deserves more attention. On the level of theories and on the level of evidence. The reason is that ultimately we want to, as realists, and or the real debate is first and foremost about our theories today. Okay, so we should make the connection to today, and I want to argue that what happened in between the episodes and today is so worth looking further into. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I want to offer an explanation why there was this focus, or has been this focus on the episodes. A lot of it is happening there. Okay. Research frontier, say, what is done versus Lavoisier versus Priestley and other people, they argue with each other. So first, it's exciting. So that's a psychological reason to look at it. So it's exciting stuff. There's drama and so on. But what is more important, there's material in the first place. There's data there to analyze for us philosophers. There are the arguments back and forth between, say, Lavoisier and Priestley and so on. And afterwards, when these successful theories are accepted, not much is happening anymore. So there's nothing exciting happening, and so it's more there is just not much material to analyze. So that's for me a bit the explanation why this focus on the episodes. So it's harder to look at the time afterwards. But yeah, I think it's worthwhile. One thing is, and I present that as an observation, and maybe it's yeah. When one looks at least these examples, and they are important examples, then the successor theories have remained entirely stable until today, only maybe minor adjustments. And if one generalizes, that means that most of our best theories today had only one predecessor, only one theory change in that field. So I throw that out as an opinion. Okay, there are people who have different opinions. Lawton said for every theory today there were 6 abandoned theories, except for abandoned theories, were substantiated. substantiates that. So there are different opinions, but my main point is that it's worthwhile looking at that. How many theories were there really? Many sequences of revolutions or theory changes were there typically real? Many people seem to assume that it's obvious that there were several, 2 or 3 or 4, and I think that's not found out by instance. So that deserves further attention, and there are different questions there, of course, what does constitute, what constitutes the theory change, and so on. So that's my main point. It's worthwhile looking at it. Okay. So second suggestion, and this is, I think, a bit more important. So I think there should be more focus on the evidence, on also principles of information or induction. And what makes it good, what makes evidence good, and strong support is good. At least if one looks at the analysis of historical episodes, there are typically, I have seen again and again, the notion of success is just simply say, it's just an all or nothing notion of success. And basically all theories that are considered are successful, right, until refuted. So there's not enough Lawton, for example, himself, that's basically as success. Not with the big success, but still it's an all or nothing notion. And yeah, it should be much more graded and nuanced. And I think that's important already in everyday life. We have more awareness than that. And also for scientists, we already heard that. We have thought that science is essential to assess how good the evidence is, how strong the support is, even if we have no meaningful theory or some such. It's essential. And there are big differences between theories and for the same theory over time. Okay, I just made such general claims here because that means my point is again that deserves further continue. So 2 questions I want to suggest here. First, I already said what is good evidence, what is strength of support and so on. Of course, we have confirmation theory and so on. There's something new, unusual stuff. Stuff is far away from application. More could be said, but and B, what I think is also worth looking at is how did precisely for the reason that it's hard to assess evidence, the strength of evidence. One good idea is, I think, to look at how it developed over time. How it has grown. The quantity and quality of the evidence has grown. That's a bit what I have worked on. So gains there have been growing at an accelerating pace. Yeah, I can go into that. That's on the handout. You're interested. And that means that theories typically gain much stronger evidence, much better evidence after they have been accepted. That was one of the talks where people talked about what was, I think, for Perrin, what was the evidence for him. That's just not the interesting question for realists. Okay, so at the time of the acceptance of Lavoisier or for Darwin, it's not. The relevant question is not how strong, what were the arguments by Darwin, but what are they today and how did they get better from Darwin to today? And there are huge differences. My opinion here, and which I just throw at you. Then my main point is that there's further, but there's no stalemate yet. I can expect to. Okay, and generally speaking, by far the best evidence is typically they have of that there's a harmonism past. Good. I skipped that. That's a bit of my work on this. That's in the handout. So, conclusion. In my nice and coherent talk, I gave 3 reasons. The doubt that the real debate in the survey. First reason was that non-participants, I think, at least in some groups, they can clearly say that realism is the dominant view, and that should be that's relevant. And the second is recent discussions last for the case, but also in the recent past show many interesting developments. And finally, I made some suggestions how that can also get better in the future. Okay, thank you.